It began like any late autumn night in Portland. Rain on the tarmac, fluorescent glare in the terminal, people huddled under trench coats and briefcases. A man with a small black attaché and an ordinary face bought a one-way ticket to Seattle. He sat by the window on Northwest Orient Flight 305, folded a piece of paper, and slid it across the aisle. "I have a bomb," it read. Calm as a man ordering coffee, he told a young flight attendant what he wanted: $200,000 in cash, for parachutes, and a quiet compliance. And the cabin buzzed from murmurs into a thin, electric panic. "Please," he said, voice steady and precise. The crew obeyed. The captain negotiated. The airline counted and counted again. Outside, city lights blurred into highway streaks. Inside, the hum of the engines was a metronome to a crime that would become legend. When the plane touched down in Seattle, the exchange was clinical: money and chutes for the lives of terrified passengers. They were allowed off the aircraft into the cold night. The man kept the crew. He ordered the jet back into the darkness with the rear stair lowered like an invitation. What happened next has shaped more than one family's grief and the FBI's obsession. Somewhere over the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, with the cabin pressurized and wind tearing through the open stairwell, he slipped into the black. No body, no parachute proved beyond dispute. Only a smear of myth and a trail of unanswered questions. Did he die in the trees? Did he vanish into a new identity? Was he a desperate opportunist or a calculating professional who exposed glaring vulnerabilities in aviation security? That single, elegant act did more than steal cash. It unmasked procedural failures, launched decades of federal manhunts, and split public opinion into rival camps: heroic outlaw or cold-blooded criminal. Every piece of evidence would become a fork in the road, and every suspect would carry the weight of someone else's truth. If this, the audacity, the silence, the stubborn absence of closure, quickens your curiosity, like and linger. What follows is not legend told in tidy chapters, but an investigation that keeps pulling at its own loose threads. Join us as we follow the footprints, re-examine the files, and confront the consequences that began the night a man named Cooper jumped and never came back. The night after the jump, the scene at the FBI field office smelled of coffee and stale cigarette smoke. Maps of the Pacific Northwest plastered the walls, pins tracking wind drift and fuel burn like a surgeon plotting an incision. Agents argued in low, urgent voices. He knew exactly what he was doing, one said, tapping a chart of Flight 305's fuel and weight. This was an amateur hour. Another answered, softer, or he got lucky. We can't tell which. What followed was less a tidy investigation than a slow, stubborn unraveling of certainty. The Bureau opened a massive manhunt that would outlast politicians and presidents. They interviewed employees with trembling hands who remembered the polite voice of the hijacker. They replayed crew statements 100 ways to the point they frayed. A flight attendant would later say, "He folded the note and smiled. He told us to be calm." You never forget that kind of calm. The captain's log became evidence, every passenger account, a sliver of truth. But the consequences spilled beyond paperwork. Airlines faced scrutiny, reputations dented by the idea that one briefcase could render a jet into a hostage room. Within months, airports began to change: screening experiments, new procedures, small, awkward first steps toward the future of travel. Behind closed doors, policymakers argued over rights, costs, and the specter of copycats. Families of suspects were dragged into the light. Suspects themselves were minted by the press, then discarded when proofs faltered. Conspiracy sprouted like moss in shadowed corners. Ex-military plots, government cover-ups, false identities woven into cafes and fishing cabins along the Columbia. For every lead the FBI chased, another opened. A sawed-through seat cushion, a bundle of ransom bills with serial numbers logged, a witness describing a heavy-set man, then a different witness describing a slimmer profile. Decades later, advances in forensics would resurface fragments of cloth and pigments, each re-examination nodding toward possibility and then recoiling into doubt. Some experts insisted the jump would have killed him. Others argued a precise parachute landing could have let him meld away into the night. And so the case mutated into folklore, evidence and myth braided into a story that damaged careers, changed airports, and left a profession embarrassed and obsessed. Which tracks lead to truth, and which belong to the story we want to believe? If that question gnaws at you, like and stay with us. Next, we peel back the suspects, the overlooked clues, and the new science that promises to test a 40-year-old legend. The cabin hums like a creature holding its breath. Wind tears through the rear stairwell, a howl that drowns the engine's steady growl and the nervous whisper of 3 remaining crew. Cooper, dark suit, small black briefcase, voice like velvet, moves with the calm of a man who has rehearsed every second. For parachutes, he tells the flight attendant. 2 for me and 2 for you, he adds, precise as a surgeon. He counts the bills. He pins his timing to the runway lights, to the night, to a pocket of weather over the Cascades where trees promise to catch what a human body might not. The air is thin, the stakes thinner. Outside, Seattle's wet tarmac glints like a promise. Inside, every breath tastes like metal. When the ransom is handed over on the ground, it looks almost theatrical. Brown paper bundles stacked on a folding table beneath buzzing hangar lights. Men in suits trading paper for lives. Passengers spill into the cool airport night, and the cabin empties of the ordinary. But the crew, 2 pilots and 1 flight attendant, remain. Cooper's demands had not been an accident. They were a lesson in leverage. He secures the money, secures the parachutes, and with a final flat instruction sends the cockpit into the black. The last image of him inside the plane is of a composed man folding a map, peering at the instruments, turning one last polite face toward those who watched him unervingly closely. The jump is not cinematic in the movies. No triumphant silhouette against moonlight. Only a violent yaw of metal, the rear stairs dropping open to a lung of cold air, a ragged tear in the night where a man stepped and ceased to be accounted for. In the hours that follow, the forest becomes a crime scene and a crucible. Coordinates are rough, the weather unforgiving. Search crews comb miles of treacherous brush while investigators rebuild a vanishing act with photographs, seat maps, and a handful of fibers. The FBI's methods, some meticulous, some maddeningly slow, begin to ossify into policy and prejudice alike. Leads bloom and die. A suspect with the right skill, a sighting that collapses under scrutiny, a tie clip, a note, a scrap of parachute that refuses to tell the whole truth. Decades of pursuit twist from procedural overhaul to folklore. For every meticulous forensic recheck, there is a new conspiracy. For every plausible suspect, a community whose name is dragged into the light. Did Cooper die on impact? Did he cheat fate and melt back into anonymity? Or was he an operative so skilled he left no human trace? Think about the evidence we trust and the stories we prefer. What answer would satisfy you? If you want to follow the trail further, stay with us as the investigation splinters into suspect lists, forensics, and the human cost of a case that never closed. The night that man stepped onto Flight 305 and quietly said he had a bomb did more than vanish into folklore. It split responsibility from mythology and left consequences that outlived the man in the parachute wind. In the weeks and months after, the tangible changes were immediate and procedural. Sky marshals whispered into policy memos. Cockpit doors were reconsidered. Passenger screening crept toward its modern rigor. Airports no longer treated a solitary black briefcase as incidental. The U.S. government rewrote the assumptions of vulnerability. Those were the concrete ripples. But the deeper consequences were less tidy. For the family members of crew and the one terrified stewardess who later told investigators she still carried the sound of that calm voice in her head, the case became a stubborn, open wound. The FBI, forced to choose between tunnel-focused evidence and public pressure, stretched resources and reputations across decades. Agents who once believed they were pursuing a single criminal found themselves arguing with historians, hobbyists, and a custody of armchair detectives who packaged uncertainty into certainty. He was methodical, one retired investigator said in our interview, or brilliant at improvising. That divide between expertise and speculation turned a law enforcement file into a cultural artifact. Then there is the paradox of identity. Dan Cooper's anonymity did not diminish his persona, it amplified it. Whether seen as a desperate man, a cunning veteran, or a phantom born from a media frenzy, Cooper became a mirror. People projected fear, admiration, skepticism. Theories multiplied not because evidence demanded it, but because narrative needed it. Every new suspect, every scrap of cloth found in a riverbank, became a vote in a public argument about what kind of America we were willing to imagine. A country vulnerable to a single individual or a system resilient enough to close its loopholes. In the end, the hijacking forced a choice about what we value more, closure or curiosity. The FBI closed a chapter without closing the book. The public kept reading. So as you watch the last frames, ask yourself, do you want the final answer, or do you accept the story that keeps changing us? If this unsettles you, give the film a like, tell us who you think Cooper was, and subscribe to follow every new thread we unearth.